Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Professor Sartorian, and this video is about my favorite astrology books that I've read in 2023. This does not mean that these books were written in 2023. They're just books that I read during this year. A few of them I have reread again, but I think these books are great if you have anybody who's studying astrology in your life that you would like to get them a gift. This would be some good astrology books to get. My list consists of not just astrology, but also astrotheology, which is astrology and theology, mostly how astrology influenced Judaism and Christianity. Sorry if you hear noises in the background. There's no way I can stop that. So let's get started. So I'm going to include 10 books in this list. The 10th book is actually an ebook. I do not have a physical copy of it, but it's The 12 Houses by Howard Sasportas. I'm not sure how to say his last name. But that book is probably my favorite book I've read about on houses, especially if you want kind of a cookbook formula. I think that one was probably one of my favorite type of astrology cookbooks for the houses. I think it went in depth, and I actually learned quite a bit of new things about houses on that. My 9th favorite book is actually called The Devil's Pulpit by Reverend Robert Taylor. He was a minister, a pastor for the Church of England. He got excommunicated because he kept on talking about how the Bible was actually an astrological text, and it was allegorical astrology that the Bible is, especially the New Testament, he mostly focuses on more so than the Old Testament. There's times where he does talk about the Old Testament, but more the New Testament. But it's really interesting, all the different connections he made with the New Testament and astrology. The Reverend Robert Taylor actually went to prison for the things he said. He then was released and lived out the rest of his day as a surgeon in France. But because of Reverend Robert Taylor, actually Darwin saw what happened to him talking against the church, that this is a reason why Darwin took a while to bring out his theory of evolution, because he saw how dangerous it was, even during this time, to speak against the church. He repeats himself in some parts, but a lot of the things I think he has to say is really cool. He has a lot more other things to say. The one thing I do have to disagree with him in this is he makes John the Baptist an Aquarius, when John the Baptist was more of the age of Aries, just because of some of the verses in the Gospel of Mark, how he talks about how John the Baptist says he's not even worthy of doing the sandal straps off of, who's to come next after him. And he talks about, in the fact that John the Baptist got decapitated, by, his head decapitated. There's a lot more Aries surrounding John the Baptist than Aquarius. He tends to also make some odd, there's a few signs he prefers talking about and ignores others and I'm not sure why, but he's definitely really big into Aquarius, and I would say Sagittarius signs. And that's the archetype, not sun signs. This channel does not focus on sun signs, but more the archetypes of what each zodiac sign is. My number 8, if you have someone who's already knows how to do natal astrology and want to learn the next thing, there's a thing called solar returns. So every time when your birthday happens, that's when the sun meets up again with where the degree of where your sun was when you were born. And instead of doing New Year's resolutions you should probably do solar return resolutions, what you want to do birthday resolutions instead. The book I'm going to recommend as my number 8 is Planets and Solar Returns. It's another kind of cookbook, astrology cookbook by Shea, and I really enjoyed this. I think this is the best solar return type of book. This book I highly recommend for any solar, like if you're wanting to get into solar returns. It was really helpful. I learned a lot from my solar return from this book, and it resonated very highly for me for how much the information is. She really, and I know it looks like a big book, but she really condensed the information really well. So my 7th book of 2023 is Astrology and Reincarnation by Manly P. Hall. It's a really short book, super interesting. I learned so much in just 48 pages. Some of it was stuff I already knew, but Manly P. Hall is great at connecting ancient religions to astrology, and he's a genius, and also with mythology and human consciousness. This is the first book that I have to say where I was like, okay, I could see astrology and reincarnation. Like, I could see why people talk about reincarnation with astrology a lot. While other people, when they talk about astrology and reincarnation, I'm rolling my eyes because it's too new age. While this is based on ancient religions, and I feel he gives it much more validity. My number 6 is Astrology of the Old Testament, or the Lost Word Regained. Talks about how the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, is an astrological document. Gives a lot of different, talks about Joseph's bow being the ecliptic plane, the path of the sun, and it really made me realize, that ancient text is an astrological document, and it's just an allegory, and it was meant to be more hidden than just saying, this is astrology. It's kind of meant to be hidden. It's really cool. I really enjoyed this book. It's number 6 because half of it I didn't feel like was as helpful. That's why it's not higher, but if it was, this probably would have been number 4, but because half of it I didn't feel like was as useful or helpful for me, as he talks about pretty advanced astrology and astrotheology, and then he goes into really basic stuff, and some things I don't agree with. I think it shows that it's a little bit outdated, and this is Astrology of the Old Testament, or the Lost Word Regained by Karl Anderson. So for my number 5, it's going to be The Gospel and the Zodiac by Bill Darlison. I think I'm saying his name wrong. This is number 5 because this has been the most thorough, and with astrology, he explains astrology, talks about the constellations that surround that zodiac. So it's really cool. He talks about the other constellations that's not just the zodiac constellations, and he talks about the Gospel of Mark and how it's an allegorical astronomy and astrology document that the Gospel of Mark is. Anyone that's interested in astrotheology, I would kind of say get them this book first, more than the other 2 I've mentioned, like The Devil's Pulpit and Astrology of the Old Testament by Karl Anderson. This one's really good if you have a Christian in your life, or someone who's interested in Christianity but also interested in astrology. I would highly recommend this book. My number 4 would be Ancient Astrology by Demetra George. She's a genius. I learned, again, so much, and there's so many useful. What's great about this book is there's tables, there's charts, there's diagrams. She explains it so concisely, and then she has practice questions to do. This is volume 1. One thing, and I think all astrologers kind of do this, they look at other ancient cultures like Egypt, Greece, Babylon, but they never give ancient Israel any look in astrology, when ancient culture should be looked at a little bit more, because I think there's proof that astrology was popular by ancient Israelites. But that's not to say, oh, I don't like the book for that reason. It's just a thing I critique I have for all authors, not hers. But other than that little silly comment, this book is amazing, especially if you want to get into ancient astrology. If modern astrology is just a little bit too convoluted, they put too much emphasis into Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, which honestly, especially Pluto, does not deserve that much power. Like, they literally gave the definition of power to Pluto, which is ridiculous. It's not even a planet. It's a dwarf planet, and traditional ancient astrology has thousands and thousands of years backed up behind it, while modern astrology doesn't. So if someone's, not really into modern astrology, I'd highly recommend this book. My number 3 would be Hellenistic Astrology by Brennan. This is my second reread of it. I love it. This is honestly one of the best astrological textbooks that you could get. There's an appendix that's great. There's bibliography, indexes, a lot of resources. There's charts, there's examples, it's concise. And the Astrology podcast is one of my favorites. This is definitely, I think I only got it for $40. It's huge, and it's great. Such a great book that I go back again and again. Even with my second reread, I learn so much. Definitely, for anyone that hey, they want to get into astrology even more in a greater depth and to know why and how for the techniques. Hellenistic Astrology by Brennan. For my number 2, it's Astrological Keywords by Manly P. Hall. I have so many tabs in this. If you have someone who is, all they know is the birth chart, that's it. Like, they want to get into astrology, but they haven't quite yet, I would get them this book. It has basic to all the way more advanced information about astrology. There's some things in here I've never seen in other astrology books that was really helpful. It has a kind of cookbook feel, but also with Manly P. Hall's vast knowledge of the spirituality and ancient cultures and history. So I highly recommend Astrological Keywords by Manly P. Hall. That was my number 2 this year. My number 1 on my list is On the Heavenly Spheres by Helena, Avelar, and Luís Ribeiro. I'm probably getting their names wrong, and I'm sorry. I was thinking about putting this as my number 2, just because it doesn't have an appendix or index or glossary, so it's like sometimes if you want to find something, you better make your own little kind of chart or something. Like, I have all these tabs, but this is the best textbook for astrology ever. It doesn't get it in a cookbook type of feel. It's like more like, well, this is the energy. Like, you're not meant to like memorize each thing. Like, Mars in the 8th house is this and this. Mars in the 9th house is this and this. It's more like, this is what Mars is about. Here's what these other houses are about. You can, like, just from interpreting, you knowing what Mars is and you know what 9th house is, you should be able to add the two together. It looks at fixed stars as like a part of the reading. It does traditional method. It's a how-to book, but it gives such depth that, like, I thought, like, oh yeah, I already know aspects, but I feel like I learned so much more of the aspects. It has a natal, talks about mundane, it talks about so many other different type of astrology, horary. It gives like the basics of horary, talks about the nodes. It has so much, this book does, and I am honestly so impressed by it. It talks about like the parts, like the part of fortune, part of spirit. If somebody had no knowledge of astrology, but they're like, hey, I know my sun sign and I know my moon, notice they have an interest in it, get them this book. This is the textbook I wish I was given when I first got into astrology, because I think it would have saved me a lot of time from other books that I read, especially modern books. This, On the Heavenly Spheres, is my number one, the astrology book that I read in 2023. Thank you for watching. I hope you were able to get some book recommendations for yourself and maybe for your loved ones who are interested in astrology. Like, subscribe, don't comment, I don't care. I don't want to hear you. Like, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I read a lot of books, so I'll probably have more videos like this in the future, but a little bit more in depth.